Hello, Chris? Chris, are you in there? So I wake up and Jimmy's got his face pressed against the glass. So I jumped out of Bobby's car and into Jimmy's and off to Nashville we go.
Greetings, folks. Thanks for joining me for your favorite podcast about banjos and the people who love them. That, of course, is the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. And I, of course, am Keith Billick, your host for the episode and for every episode. I have a lot of important announcements to make before we get started here. The most important of which is the holidays are upon us, folks, and I am here to help you with that pesky shopping list that you all have. It's going to be a one-stop shop for you this year, folks. That's because over on banjopodcast.com, you're going to be able to see the full line of world-famous official Picky Fingers branded merchandise. And I'm talking 4 brand new colors of t-shirts available in all sizes. The lightweight hoodies, the knit beanie hats. You lose a lot of heat in the head, folks. You're going to want those to keep warm. And stickers, as well as downloadable music and banjo tablature for the Picky Fingers theme music. So regardless of who's on your list or what they're asking for, what they really want is some of that official Picky Fingers merch. So once again, that's over at banjopodcast.com. And then you also get the satisfaction of knowing that you are supporting the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast in the process. The other most important news to tell you about is also a way to support the show and also a way to receive excellent rewards for yourself in return. And that's by becoming a very important picker, a VIP supporter of the show over at patreon.com/banjopodcast. Today's VIP supporter of the show is Sean McCormick. Sean is a Hall of Honor level VIP supporter, which, as many of you know, is the highest civilian honor bestowed upon podcast listeners. So, Sean, thank you so much for your generous support of the show. I really, really appreciate it and couldn't do it without you. On a related note, another important announcement is that one of the perks that all the VIP supporters get is we all get together for a monthly VIP Lounge video call. So that's me and your fellow supporters hopping on a call to chat about all things banjo or life, which is kind of synonymous anyway. But anyway, every December, I open up the VIP Lounge video call to all listeners, whether or not you have enrolled on Patreon or not. So keep your eyes out for that. You will still have to go to the Patreon page to get that meeting link, but this year's all listener VIP Lounge is scheduled for December 21st at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And to my European and other time zone listeners, I have heard your desperate pleas for a different time on the VIP Lounge to, have it not fall at like 1 or 2 or 3 a.m. your time. I have heard those pleas and I will act on that. But unfortunately for this one, we're sticking with 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So once again, over on patreon.com/banjopodcast, sign up to support the show or go check it out if you want to join in on the VIP Lounge for everybody. And before we get to the episode, I do have one more announcement, and that is about a brand new website called Daily Banjo Licks. Now, Daily Banjo Licks is a fresh approach to learning and applying bluegrass banjo licks to popular jam standards. Banjo player Bennett Sullivan, who a lot of you might remember from episode 95, came up with the idea for Daily Banjo Licks on a summertime hike in western North Carolina. And clearly it's a concept that would be a fun way for people to learn about bluegrass, improve their ears, refine your timing, and just become an all-around more versatile picker. The concept is very simple. Every day you get a new lick sent directly to your inbox. Each lick features tablature, a backing track, song examples, and repeated slow versions for those of you who are learning by ear. So this is how you get in the game. You go to banjolicks.com and sign up for a free 7-day trial. And listeners of this podcast can even enter coupon code PICKY50 and get 50% off your first month of lick learning. At Daily Banjo Licks, you'll find licks of all types, including traditional, modern, kickoffs, endings, and backup. Plus, there's a song section for you to brush up on your bluegrass repertoire. So once again, head over to banjolicks.com, use the coupon code PICKY50, that's PICKY50, to try it out for free for the whole month and make some licks stick. As always, you can also contact the show at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. Looking forward to hearing from you there. Today's featured guest is Chris Warner. Chris is best known for his stints touring and recording with the great Jimmy Martin. In fact, many of you probably heard from Chris along with Tom Adams a couple episodes ago talking about Jimmy Martin. But for this one, it's just pure unadulterated Chris talking about his background and his playing style, along with a few more Jimmy Martin stories along the way. And he really epitomizes the classic Jimmy Martin sound of super solid, hard-driving banjo playing, which I know we all love. Chris also happens to be one of the most in-demand technicians for banjo setups and conversion neck building, and he gets into a bit of that too. So put your hands together and give a warm Picky Fingers welcome to Chris Warner.
My name's Chris Warner. I'm from Red Line, Pennsylvania, which isn't too far from where you're sitting right now. The first time I ever was introduced to five-string banjo playing was in high school assembly program.
Yeah.
Two friends of mine that I didn't even know at the time. I was friends with them in school, but I never even knew that they played.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, they come out on stage at this assembly program.
Yeah.
One's playing the banjo, and the other's playing the guitar, and it just blew me away. I never heard anything like that before.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I was like 15.
Sure.
And I liked rock and roll at the time. You know, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, Elvis Presley, and still do, as a matter of fact.
Sure.
But I had to learn how to play this banjo, you know. So I had asked Ray King, who was the banjo player, if he could show me something on the banjo.
Yeah.
I didn't even own a banjo, you know.
Right.
He said, well, you're going to have to get a banjo. I said, okay. So I go home and pester my dad. I said, I want to learn to play the banjo. He said, no, I'm not buying you another instrument. He said, you tried the guitar, you tried the trumpet, you tried the accordion.
Okay.
And I said, but this is different. This is different. So we found a friend of ours in Red Line, an old man who had a banjo, an old Orpheum. Problem was it was a 4-string. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know the difference. That's how naive I was.
Yeah, banjo's a banjo.
A banjo's a banjo. That's exactly right. So we bought it. I remember it was $15. So I show up at Ray King's place to take a lesson. He said, well, you can't play that. I said, why not? He said, that's a 4-string. You need a 5-string like this one, you know, with the 5th string on it. I thought, oh, no, now I have to go back to Dad and tell him, I need another banjo, Dad.
And you wasted some money.
Yeah. And this was in the mid-'60s, actually early 60s. So I ended up finding an old Montgomery Ward banjo that I think went through every banjo player in York County's hands as their first banjo, which was fine with me. I just wanted a 5-string banjo.
Yeah.
So that's how I got started.
So you mentioned that you had tried your hand at, well, you said guitar and trumpet and an accordion, but you knew somehow that this was different. What do you think it was about the banjo that had that kind of effect on you, where you basically refocused your life into pursuing this thing?
Well, the sound of it I'd never heard anything like that. And I guess it's the same thing that affects everybody that hears a banjo for the first time, I just never heard anything like that. And even though I tried these other instruments, they required learning to read music, which never interested me at all. So when he first started showing me on the banjo, there was no music involved, no sheet music involved at all. It was just learning the finger work and tap your foot, and so I didn't have to sit down and learn actual music as far as reading notes. Although I did early on, I took piano lessons when I was a good bit younger, and I had started learning to read music then. But it was at the time where when I was in the house sitting at the piano trying to learn to play the piano, all my friends were outside playing, and I could see them through the window. I thought, I want to be out there, I don't want to be in here learning to play the piano. Now I wish I could play the piano. But back then when you're a kid, that's not the thing,
Of course.
For most people. But that's how the banjo thing got started.
Were you exploring, you said you were a fan of rock and roll. I imagine that once you started playing this instrument, you maybe changed your listening habits as well and started discovering people that played the kind of music that you wanted to go after. What were your early memories of that?
That's exactly what happened. I never stopped liking early rock and roll. Still love it today. But I started to buy records like most everybody has done. Outside of somebody sitting down with you and showing you, the only way you can learn is to listen to records.
Yeah.
Which back then, with long play records, you used to have a speed on the record player that was 19. There was 33 and a third, 45.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was it 19? It's real
Probably
slow.
16.
16, that's what it was. Real slow speed.
Right.
So, every note would be boom, 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 real low pitch,
Yeah.
But it was slow enough that you could grasp it and slowly figure it out. Started to go to shows and festivals wherever I could.
Do you remember particular musicians that you gravitated toward in terms of enjoying their style or enjoying their music?
Well, probably like most people that start out, you like it all. If it's got a banjo in it, you like it all.
It's for you,
because you don't know the difference between a real excellent banjo player and a mediocre banjo player. It just all sounds great, But even back then, I gravitated toward Flatt & Scruggs and Jimmy Martin, Bill Monroe, early Stanley Brothers, the top four back then.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And you said you were going to local shows. Were you able to see prominent acts like the ones you just listed, or was it this more local band type of concerts?
Well, there wasn't much locally going on. We ended up going down to Sunset Park. Have you ever heard of Sunset Park? Yeah. That was a big country bluegrass park down toward Philadelphia. And they had all the top bluegrass bands. In fact, predominantly through the summer, they would have mostly bluegrass bands and some country bands thrown in there. But they had everybody showed up there. Wilma Lee and Stoney Cooper, Stanley Brothers, Don Reno and Red Smiley, all of them came there.
Yeah.
So early on, I got to see all those greats, you know, and then they had, out in the parking lot, they had jam sessions, especially back then. The jamming in the parking lot seemed to be bigger than it is now, really. And that would give you a chance to practice what you've learned, no matter what level you were at. So we just kind of lived for Sunday afternoons at Sunset Park. You know, that was the place to be if you love bluegrass.
Not to mention making personal connections with other people who might live, relatively close to you.
Exactly. were close enough to New York City that Davy Grissman and the band he was with at the time, Winnie Winston on banjo, and they would drive down to see some certain bands, so they would show up. But it was just anybody that you ever talk to that's been to Sunset Park in those early days will tell you the same thing. That was just the place to be.
Yeah. I've heard lots of fond
you just
memories
lived
about it.
for Sunset Park, you know.
That sounds great. So, I mean, we'll get to it pretty quickly, of course, about how you're, you became more of a professional player within a few years. But the fact that you were able to advance that quickly, what do you think were some of the secrets to you being able to really get up to speed in a hurry?
Practice, a lot of practice. I was absorbed in it so much that, and this is probably not unlike a lot of musicians did the same thing, but in my case, that's all I wanted to do. I'd come home from school, go upstairs in my bedroom or out on the front porch and practice. I probably practiced a minimum of 5 hours a day.
Wow.
Every day.
Yeah.
I got to where I took it to school in the morning, and I was in the agriculture class, and they had an office space down by the classroom that they weren't using. They just used it for storage. So they let me come down there with the banjo. In the free period in the morning, I'd go down there and practice the banjo.
They gave you your little banjo room and you got it. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Of course, then I'd take it home with me and practice all evening. I didn't run around much. And my parents would my dad, they were supportive. They didn't try to stop me, but they did really push me to do it.
Yeah.
They weren't bluegrass fans. There again, they probably never heard much of it, like I didn't up till till that school program. But they never tried to discourage me. But when I'm sitting up in my bedroom cranking on the banjo, playing the same licks over and over and over, I know it must have drove them nuts. But Dad would holler up. He'd say, "Come down here and watch TV with the family." He said, "Put that thing down." Yeah. So I'd come down for 10 minutes, and then I'm right back up again.
Yeah, humor them a little bit and get them off your case.
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't even realize until the last chat we had was you had quite an opportunity come up when you had only been playing for, what you said, 3 years or so?
About 3.5 years before I went with Jimmy.
Yeah, tell me how that came about.
Well, I was playing with a band in Baltimore, and Bill Monroe was playing in the area, and him and his whole band stopped by the bar room where we were playing. And I thought, I'm going to ask him for a job, So I did.
Yeah.
And he wrote my name and phone number down, and that was the end of that discussion. But ever since then, I was kind of waiting for his banjo player to quit, so maybe I'd get a call.
Wondering if that phone would ring.
Yeah, exactly. And he had heard me play because we were the house band at that bar. Whether he liked me or didn't like me, I had no clue, but hoping that he liked me enough, he'd call me.
Sure.
So, a few months after I talked to Bill, Jimmy was playing a few miles south of here, and I went down to see him, and Vic Jordan was on the banjo, and Bill Yates was on the bass, and Vassar Clements was on the fiddle.
Oh, wow.
And they were sitting out in front of the stage on the bench. And I had known Bill Yates and Vic Jordan prior to that. So I went over and sat down and started talking with him, and I said, Bill had in that period of time, was looking for a banjo player. So I was hoping to get a call.
Vic had put in notice or something like that?
See, I didn't know that at the time.
Okay.
So in the conversation, I mentioned to him, I said, I'm kind of hoping to get a call from Bill about the banjo job. And they kind of all looked at each other and sort of snickered,
Yeah.
And I said, okay, what do you know that I don't know? Because you could tell something was going on there.
Yeah.
Vic said, he said, I got the job. I said,
the Monroe job.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So So I said, well, that's great. I would have liked to have had it, obviously, but I'm glad you got it.
Yeah.
So Vic said, well, Jimmy didn't find anybody yet. Would you be interested in playing with Jimmy? I said, oh, yeah, absolutely. I actually liked Jimmy's music better than Bill's overall because I liked that rhythm I was hearing. Didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
But I liked that feel that Jimmy got. I liked the songs that Jimmy was doing. And so I thought, yeah, I'd be interested in that.
Yeah.
So he went down and talked to Jimmy, and Vic came back up. And Jimmy had heard me play, too, at some parks where they were booked and we were the house band. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he remembered me or not, or how I played or how I didn't play, whatever.
Sure.
But Vic came back up and said, do you have your banjo with you? I said, yeah, I got the banjo. He said, Jimmy wants you to come down in the little building that they were using as a dressing room. So I went down and I knew all the songs.
Yeah.
So I could kick off most anything Jimmy wanted me to play, but I wasn't playing it the way JD was playing, that rhythm that Jimmy likes. So I played whatever he asked me to kick off and play, and he said, okay, he said, I'll let you know. We're going to be up in northern Pennsylvania in a couple weeks. He said, I'll let you know by then. Mm-hmm. Sure enough, a week or so later, he called and said, can you meet me somewhere? We'll be coming back from that park back to Nashville on a Sunday night in the middle of the night. We were playing a local park then, mm-hmm. So.
And you had to meet Jimmy in the middle of the night?
I had to. That's a story in itself. I said, yeah, I'll meet you. We said, I'll meet you at such and such an interchange at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, on Interstate 81. Uh-huh. He said, we should be coming back through there about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Now, was the understanding that this was for another audition, or you're hopping on his bus?
No, he's hiring me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got a local musician here, Bobby Diamond, who's since passed on, but he played bass with Bill Monroe. He's a good banjo player, good fiddle player. I said, Bobby, I got to meet Jimmy up on 81 near Carlisle. Can you run me up there? And so he did. So we got there first, and we're sitting up on the interstate at this interchange waiting on Jimmy. And we fell asleep. The next thing I know, there's this knocking on the window. Hello, Chris? Chris, are you in there? So I wake up and Jimmy's got his face pressed against the glass, So
that's everyone's worst nightmare.
Well, yeah, it could have been. So I jumped out of Bobby's car and into Jimmy's and off to Nashville we go. He was using on that show. He used Rule Yarborough.
Yeah.
And Rule was, of course, they were all in the car. So that's how I ended up going with Jimmy.
Interesting. Now you've referred a few times to you not knowing, I forget how you put it, you not knowing how Jimmy wanted it or not having the exact rhythm style that Jimmy wanted to hear from his banjo players. Go into that a bit. What do you mean by that, and how did that develop for you once you signed on with him?
Well, the rhythm on the banjo, your right hand picking hand, instead of being it's more. It's got a rhythm and a lope to it.
Yeah.
It's the same feel as a fiddler starting off a fiddle tune. Do da 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 da. It's that same type of feel on the banjo, and a lot of banjo players now are playing that because they've picked up on that, over the years. Back when I first started, you didn't hear banjo players doing much of that, if any.
they were doing more of just the straight feels, more similar to like an Earl Scruggs type of sound?
Yeah, more of a rhythmless. It's not exactly the right way to put it, but it didn't have that. It was just more of a straighter roll to it. It's a little hard to describe. You can hear it. But
little extra bounce to it or
something.
something.
Exactly. Because that's what Jimmy's playing on the guitar, that same type of rhythm. Jimmy's goal was to get everybody in the band playing that same rhythm. And when everybody in the band is playing that same rhythm, that's what gives Jimmy's rhythm that extra, like you said, bounce or that rhythmic feel.
Makes the whole thing work.
Yeah. It's not so syncopated, if that's the right word, but a good extreme would be the Stanley Brothers feel. You know, where they're doing more like on the guitar.
Yeah.
You know, Jimmy's doing doodle-da-doodle-da-doodle-da-doodle-da. You know, he's doing that same rhythm.
Milwaukee is where we were before we came here. Working in a brewery, I met in the finest beer. He came to me on a payday night, said, let's go to Tennessee. So we came down to Nashville to the Grand Ole Opry.
So almost as famous as the type of rhythm that Jimmy wants is his ability or inability to express that clearly. So a lot of banjo players, and we've already talked a bit about it, how oftentimes it's difficult to decipher what Jimmy really wants. What do you remember about how he would communicate this rhythm to you?
Well, that was always some of the problem with Jimmy is that he couldn't communicate it clearly. So a lot of times you never knew exactly what he was getting at.
Yeah.
You know, it got to be a guessing game a lot of times.
So, like, what would he say? What was his version of trying to get you on track?
Well, what threw me the most at first when I first went with him, he would keep saying, "You're not playing the right timing. You're not playing the right timing. You know, your timing is not right." And I'm thinking, timing to me was meter. You know, either in time, like tapping your foot to
playing
the time,
to a metronome or something.
You're either in time or you're out of time. And I'm thinking, well, I'm in time. What does he mean? You know, and I couldn't figure this out. And he kept saying, "You're not playing the right time, and it's time, and that's where it's at." And it's driving me nuts. You know. Finally, I think the rest of the band was sitting back getting a kick out of this. It was frustrating to me.
They had probably all been through it already.
Yeah. And Vassar Clements said one time, and I told him, I was saying, "Man," I said, "he's driving me nuts." I said, "I don't know what he's talking about. I'm in time." Vassar says, "Well, I think what he means is when he says timing, he means everything. Rhythm, not just meter being in time, but drive, the rhythm in the roll, you know." And once he explained it to me, I thought, "Oh, okay. Now I get it."
Yeah.
And ever since he told me that, then I was off and running. Then I knew when he'd say timing, I knew he didn't mean meter.
And your interpretation or what you were able to get from Vassar was he meant that bounce that you just demonstrated?
Exactly. It's exactly what he meant. That bounce and then drive, you know, where you punch notes. You know, there's certain points where you have to punch it.
Yeah, I'm hearing a certain assertiveness to the articulations. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. And just instead of just doing just kind of bland.
Yeah.
You know, you're picking the notes, but there's nothing behind it. You know, there's drive and emphasis.
Yeah.
That you need to do. And when Jimmy would say timing, that's what he means.
All of it.
He incorporates everything in that one word.
Yeah.
Timing. So once I knew that, I didn't have much problem after that.
Okay.
I knew what to strive for,
Other than just that overall, that overarching concept of timing, what other feedback did you get from Jimmy about your banjo playing, or was that pretty much once you had it, you were good?
Well, once I started to understand what he was getting at, we could have more understandable conversations about it. I could talk to him. Before then, I'm thinking, I'm in meter, I'm in time.
Yeah, sounds very confusing.
Yeah. I don't know what to do for you, But once Vassar explained that to me, and I still think they were getting a kick out of this.
I'm sure. Did you then experience that with other band members and were able to get a kick out of it yourself, watching them kind of squirm around?
Well, I wasn't that evil-minded. I don't like to see people squirm. And that's one reason I sat down with Tom Adams when Tom wanted to go with Jimmy, and I was explaining all this to him so it'd be a little easier on him.
Yeah.
He didn't have to figure it all out on his own.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of musicians, particularly banjo players, don't stay with Jimmy very long because he's hard to take.
Yeah.
Especially if you're new. They're confused. They don't know what to do for him.
Yeah.
And Jimmy's mindset is, well, if I tell a guy he's doing really well, he'll get the big head and leave.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the way he looked at things, So he doesn't tell you too often. I finally stood up to him one time and I said, you've got to tell me when I'm doing right because I don't know what to do if you don't tell me when I'm doing it right and when I'm doing it wrong, But gradually, me and Jimmy got things in sync to where I finally understood how he tried to explain things. Mm-hmm. He wasn't real educated. He only went to 8th grade in school, so his vocabulary was limited as to how to make himself understood to other people. But that was just Jimmy. But we got kind of on the same page.
Yeah, you kind of had to meet him more where he already was.
Yeah.
Interesting. You used the word, when you were talking about the timing, you used the word drive a few times. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely something that I personally admire a lot about your playing is very, the word hard driving gets tossed around a lot with banjo playing, but I definitely think you have a lot of that in your playing. What does that mean to you, and how did you work on that?
Well, I always liked hard driving music, even if it was rock and roll, like Jerry Lee Lewis. I didn't like Beach Boys. The music they did was great, but it's not my kind of rock and roll. I liked Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis and those guys that really got in there and
had that extra attitude to it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same way in bluegrass, particularly the banjo playing. There's times where you want to punch a note, and there's times when you want to lay back on it, on some notes, and then you punch it at the right spots. If you listen to a good lead singer, they're doing the same thing with their voice.
You kind of caught my ear just now when you said certain times where you want to drive the note or have it lay back a little bit, you said.
Right.
Do any examples come to mind of a song where you might want to do one versus the other? Well,
you do that in every song, especially up-tempo stuff. Like Walking Shoes, for example. Right there. right there where you slide in. Instead of making it real bland. You know what I mean? There's just places where instead of just kind of floating through it with no emphasis, you know. And you hear most banjo players now have picked up on that. They're all playing great. There's a lot of great banjo players. Back when I started, there was a lot of banjo players that could play the notes, but they didn't have any oomph.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't put anything behind it.
Interesting.
And I always liked that. I always liked the drive.
Yeah, it sounds great. So much more interesting aspect to it.
Even with chromatic, playing the melodic stuff, you can put drive in that, where a lot of guys don't do that. But
absolutely.
But you can, you know.
Yep. Sorry for the interruption, folks. We'll be right back with the rest of the episode in just a few moments, but I had to take this opportunity to tell you about some of the sponsors of Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. The first one up is Elderly Instruments. I always tell people how Elderly is the world's most trusted source for new, used, and vintage stringed instruments of all kind. They're the first place I go for all my banjo needs, and also, by the way, any guitar, violin, ukulele, mandolin needs you have, they're going to have all of that. But you don't need to take my word for it anymore, folks. Elderly Instruments was just named the best small business in the country by the United States Chamber of Commerce. So first of all, congratulations to Stan Werbin, Lillian Werbin, and all the rest of the Elderly family for that remarkable award. And second of all, I encourage you all to go see what the fuss is about. Either get into the showroom in Lansing, Michigan, or visit them online at elderly.com. They have the entire inventory up there. They ship worldwide, and they have that great customer service that wins folks awards. And they're just a phone call away if you ever need any advice on any of those products. So once again, elderly.com, or call them at 517-372-7880. The Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast is also sponsored by our good friends over at Peghead Nation. Peghead Nation is the nation's #1 site for streaming video courses in banjo, guitar, mandolin, fiddle, dobro, upright bass, and ukulele, where you can learn bluegrass, old time, and many other styles from some of the most talented players and instructors in all of roots music. Here is some of the selections, and this is just the banjo stuff. You can take beginning banjo with Bill Evans, bluegrass banjo with Bill Evans, clawhammer banjo with Evie Layden, Wade Ward style banjo with Bruce Molsky, the banjo according to Danny Barnes, or contemporary bluegrass banjo with Wes Corbett. Now, no matter what course you select, it's going to come with high-quality multi-angle video lessons, downloadable notation and tablature, play-along tracks, and plenty of tunes and songs to play. And perhaps best of all, Picky Fingers listeners get a month free by entering coupon code PICKYFINGERS, all one word, all lowercase, at checkout. So once more, go to pegheadnation.com and enter Picky Fingers at checkout to get your first month free. The Picky Fingers podcast is also brought to you by Sullivan Banjos. Now, I'm very familiar with Sullivan Banjos. I've been playing one for nearly 20 years. I get tons of compliments on that banjo's sound, and that's really no surprise because the Sullivan name has been synonymous with incredible banjo workmanship and tone for decades. So whether you are looking for a pre-war style traditional design on through the craziest custom design you can think of, Eric Sullivan is here for you to make your dreams a reality. So get in touch with him over at sullivanbanjo.com, email him at sullivanbanjo@gmail.com, or Sometimes the best way is just the old-fashioned way. Give him a call at 502-365-5022. And don't forget to tell him that Keith at the Picky Fingers Podcast sent you. You were demonstrating Jimmy Martin's concept of timing and what that meant to you as a banjo player, playing with that extra swing or bounce or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And you had mentioned that learning to do that actually makes other playing, such as I think particularly slower playing, you said that makes that a lot easier. Why don't you explain how that works?
Yeah. Well, usually that rhythm on the roll kind of helps you stay in time because you have that rhythmic feel in your body, in your hand, you know.
Uh-huh.
You can go almost... You can get pretty slow with it without getting out of time or sounding like you're about to get out of time. Or,
it still sounds groovy and musical.
Yeah. Where most banjo players don't want to play anything with a roll. It's too slow, understandably, you know. But if you play with that rhythm, that bounce and that lope, it gives you a better feel for it. Mm-hmm. And you can stay in time a little better when you do a slower tune.
Right. And that same piece being played without that type of rhythm just kind of sounds a little flat, I think.
Yeah, there's just no life to it to me unless you have that feel. And I've done it so long now that I can't do it any other way. You know, It's hard for me to demonstrate playing without that lope in it.
Yeah.
That rhythm, you know, because that's just the way you learn to feel it after a while. Just feels natural to me.
I guess maybe that's an interesting question is once you learn to play with that Jimmy Martin rhythm, does playing with that tend to apply easily to playing in other musical situations, or do you have to then switch away from that as you go to play with other bands, different types of rhythm guitarists or band settings?
Well, when I go to another, fill in with a band or go with another band, fortunately, the last band that I was with, a band called Bluestone, they all liked that kind of rhythm. Mm-hmm. They all tended to play that with that kind of feel to the music. So it was no issue with them. You could fit right in.
Yeah.
Other bands that I've filled in with that don't have that rhythm, I'm so used to playing that way that if they don't feel comfortable for me to play with rhythm-wise, I just kind of tune them out. And I just play the way I feel.
Yeah.
Like I want to, like I'm used to playing. Because I can't go back, you know, I can't unlearn what I've learned,
right?
You know,
yeah.
And if they're playing more of a straighter rhythm, like say the Stanley Brothers, you know, it's still hard for me. That's why I would never fit in playing with a band with the Stanley Brother type feel.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It would be hard for me to do that. When we did that project where Dudley Connell played the guitar on it, most of the rest of the guys in the band were Jimmy Martin band members at the time. Earl Yeager and Audie Blaylock and myself. And we all played with that rhythm that Jimmy likes.
I'm a hard-working living man. I work from dusk till dawn. On Friday I get my money. On Mondays
I can't save a dollar, no matter how I try. If things don't get better, I don't know how I'll ever get by.
When that CD came out, it went over pretty good, and people wanted to see the band. Well, there was no band, but maybe I can get them all together.
It was basically Jimmy's band.
Basically Jimmy's band with Dudley Connell. And so we did play about a dozen jobs, and Dudley commented that the rhythm was so good, but it was different than he was used to. And you could hear it in Dudley's rhythm on the guitar. Dudley tends to play more, or did then, up to that point, play more of a Stanley Brother type of rhythm.
Do you think he changed a little after that because of that experience?
Well, I think he might have, having then gone with the Seldom Seen, because they're not Stanley Brothers
right
in any way, shape, or form. I think his rhythm did change. But he even admitted that when he was helping us out on these shows, that his rhythm changed when we got together and played, because we kind of pulled him into it.
Yeah.
Subconsciously, he
kind of didn't have a choice.
He just, sort of just went with it, It's hard not to play that once you've learned it and gotten used to playing with that rhythmic bounce.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah.
Now, you did 2 separate stints with Jimmy, is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What were the circumstances of you leaving the first time, and then what made it seem like a good idea to join back up?
Well, the first time I left for pretty much the same reason everybody leaves is not making enough money. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy was still hard to deal with a lot of times, and then not making money on top of it.
That's a hard combination.
Yeah, that gets to be a little tough to take. So Bill Monroe had offered me the job while I was with Jimmy, and oddly enough, we were rehearsing at Jimmy's house for a record. And for those of you who remember what records are, they're those big vinyl things that you used to put on record players.
They're back in style now, Chris.
That's what I hear, yeah. So James Monroe called me at Jimmy's house. And Jimmy and the whole band are right in the same room where the telephone is. So here I am on the phone with James Monroe, offering me the job with Jimmy, or with Bill.
Yeah.
This was in the 60s. And I just felt like I was starting to get the feel of Jimmy's music and starting to play it halfway decently. And so I turned Bill down. Looking back on it, I don't know if that was the right thing to do or not, But at any rate, I did it. But I would have hated to stood in front of Jimmy and say, yeah, I'll take the job. I'll see you, Jimmy.
Yeah.
That was uncomfortable. But I stayed with Jimmy. And 6 months later, then I quit, moved back to Pennsylvania. In the 80s, about 85, Tom Adams had just quit Jimmy, and Jimmy was looking for a banjo player. He had called me to fill in on a local job, which I did, and I got Earl Yeager, the bass. That's where Jimmy got to know Earl Yeager, who eventually came with us on the bass. But after absorbing all the things Jimmy was teaching me in the 60s and having 20 years to think about it, I was better at playing his music then by the second time around than I was the first time around. And we went down, helped him on the show, and everything just felt like we'd been together for those 20 years as a band.
Oh, wow.
It just clicked. Don't ask me why, but it just clicked. Jimmy was probably the happiest I've ever seen him. He was jumping, dancing around, and laughing and carrying on. He was loving it.
Yeah.
So then he offered me the job right then again. And at the time, I wasn't thinking at all about doing it again, with Jimmy. And as much as I loved his music, I turned him down at the time. And Jimmy said, well, if you don't want to move to Nashville, could you just meet me at the jobs? I said, well, I'm just not interested, Jimmy. So that's where we left it.
Yeah.
And I came home and I talked it over with my wife, and she loves bluegrass as much as I did. And she said, well, why don't you do it? Why don't you do it for one summer and see how it goes, you know? So the more I thought about it, I thought, okay, if you're up for it, I'm up for it. So I called him back, and he hadn't found anybody yet. So then I started back with him.
Yeah.
And then stayed for 4 years.
Now, I know you mentioned that when you did that fill-in gig, that the music sounded great and it was a great experience. But did you have any reason to believe that the other reasons that you left, that those were maybe going to be a different situation, such as was he making more money at that time, and or was he easier to deal with in some ways?
Well, it turned out that he was easier to deal with because I was playing his music better.
Okay.
And he didn't have to say anything to me about how to play, because like I say, over the years, I remembered everything he told me.
Yeah.
And I would be playing with a band, and all of a sudden it would dawn on me, you know, oh yeah, that's the way Jimmy, I remember that's what he wanted me to do. I get it. I get it now. You know, I understand it. Then I could put it to use, work on it, practice it. And so by the time 85 rolled around and I went back with him, I was pretty comfortable with playing his music.
Yeah.
And he seemed to like it. He didn't say much. And then later, a year or so later, then that same bass player came with us, Earl Yeager.
Earl. Yeah, cool. So we've talked a lot about you playing Jimmy's music, but I'm wondering if you have a way of explaining, when did you feel you growing into having your own style as a banjo player, and how would you describe that style?
Well, I don't know that I have all that different style from any other hard-driving bluegrass player. I always liked the hard-driving traditional. That's what I'm best at. That's what I enjoy doing. I've played a little melodic over the years and still do if it calls for it. Mm-hmm. But my love is in traditional hard-driving bluegrass, and that's what I try to play. I try to stick to the melody. Yeah. If I have a style at all, it's for the most part sticking to the melody and trying to play as much of the melody as I can, not straying too far. It's one of those things, if you get a chance to play two breaks in a song, the first one you play the melody, the second one you can go a little off, and hopefully you can come up with some licks that nobody's played before along the way.
You know, you mentioned your hard driving style as kind of the basis for your approach, and then also playing the melody. Do you have any advice for people looking to work on either of those aspects?
The main advice I would give anybody that's just coming along and learning is to learn the Scruggs style and concentrate on the timing end of it.
Yeah.
The rhythm and the timing, and get a good feel for that. I can't say enough about learning Earl Scruggs first.
Right.
And then once you get fairly proficient at playing Scruggs style, you know, you can go off and start doing your own thing. It gives you a good solid foundation, and you can go off doing melodic, you know, Bill Keith type of stuff, Tony Trischka type stuff. And if you ask either one of those guys the same question, I'll guarantee you they'll tell you the same thing. Get a good foundation in Scruggs style first. I've run into guys over the years that start right out playing melodic because they love Tony Trischka stuff. They love Bill Keith stuff, you know, and I get that. I understand that, why they would, if that's their like. But it doesn't give them a good solid foundation as far as timing, a good right hand, you know, and drive.
Yeah.
A lot of guys that start into melodic right away the feel for it is kind of wishy-washy. You know, they tend to play up in the middle of the head anyway, where you get a mushier, you know. Instead of being back here, where you get a good solid feel. I always tried to play what melodic I played back where I would normally play my breaks.
Yeah.
And not move up here because I always hated to hear that mushy. That to me is for backup. You know. Instead of mushy like that, I'd rather hear it snappier, you know. That's my likes.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I can always tell when a record comes on, CD comes on, the radio or something, where they're playing.
Oh yeah.
You can,
it makes a big difference.
You can tell they're up here rather than back here.
Absolutely.
But there again, that's me. That's my preference.
Now, you just raised the issue of playing backup. Let me hear you talk about that. I know you said Jimmy always wanted you to play rolling backup. Does that continue to kind of be your sensibility for what a banjo should do?
Well, of course, not on the slower stuff, obviously. You know, he liked all those licks. He just wants something going on all the time.
Yeah.
You know, Jimmy's main instrument is the banjo. Bill Monroe's is the violin, the fiddle. You know, Bill likes the fiddle.
Right.
But Jimmy likes the banjo to be doing something all the time. So here again, the attack with your right hand, even on backup, you don't want it to be lazy. You want it to pop a little bit. You know? So you deaden the notes. You know, sharp notes, not, you know.
Yeah.
To make it extreme one side or the other, but
it's very noticeable. Yeah.
So you deaden those notes, what I call popping the notes, you know, like that instead of, you know.
If I had to guess, I would say that your taste in, for example, the rock and roll music that you enjoyed was that more, I guess I'll say aggressive. That sounds like a bad word, but the more aggressive attack in the rock and roll. I feel like that made you a good fit for playing this style of music later in your life.
I never thought of it that way, but now that you mention it, it's a possibility. You know, that more aggressive is a good word for it, I think.
Yeah.
That's the kind of rock and roll I liked, and that's the way I like to hear my bluegrass. You know?
Yeah. I really enjoy your playing on some of your solo albums that you were doing throughout a lot of those years. Were some of those done while you were in Jimmy's band?
The first 3 albums I did when they were still albums, long play albums, were done when I was with Jimmy in the late 80s. And then later on, I had stopped playing for a while, and then when I came back, I started playing with Audie Blaylock. And I didn't have any CDs out, so I took the last 2 of those LP projects and put them on a CD.
Yeah.
So it's a double album CD on the back, entitled "Back Again." But then I did another CD later that just as a project. I don't even know if I was playing with anybody at the time, but
Right.
I just wanted to do another. I had written some songs and wanted to use those songs, so I put them on, a lot of them on that CD.
I guess what I'm curious about is, I mean, for one thing, like you mentioned, that's a really good opportunity for folks to go get some of that music that isn't available on the LP anymore. You can still get it in the CD form, even though it's like under a different name and stuff. But you mentioned that Jimmy didn't want his players going out and picking at festivals with other people. I'm wondering if he had a same or a similar type of attitude about you doing solo recordings. Do you have any knowledge of like what he thought about you doing that, or did he mind?
He didn't mind that at all. He didn't mind that at all. What he did mind was between his jobs coming back wherever you were living, most everybody in the band in the 80s, in fact, everybody in the band in the 80s didn't live in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we just kind of converged on the job.
Yeah.
Like spokes of a wheel, and played the show and then dispersed back.
Meet in the middle, right?
Yeah, dobro player was from North Carolina. Aldi was from Michigan. Me and Earl from Pennsylvania. So, but what he did mind was going back home and playing with local bands.
Oh, wow.
And believe it or not, we didn't believe it at first either. He said, I can always tell when you guys go home and start picking with other bands. He said, and you come back, he said, I can tell you've been doing that. And we thought, but he could.
What do you think it was? Or what?
Well, I think it's because we didn't have that, got away from that nucleus, Jimmy's sound and Jimmy's guitar. And now we go home and just because we wanted to play or make a couple extra dollars at it, you know, we went with other bands and filled in and subconsciously got away from that total feel that we had when we were all together with Jimmy.
Interesting.
He could tell it. He could tell it right away. He said, you guys been playing with other bands, haven't you? Yeah, we have.
He busted you on that a few times?
Yeah, he did. Yep.
Oh. Let's talk about some of your other work in terms of like you've made quite a side business out of your setup and your lutherie. When did you become interested in that and develop those skills?
Well, that all started not long after I started to play the banjo when I was 16. I couldn't afford to pay somebody else to do my repair work. So I just started to tinker with my own instruments and learned to repair my own instruments. And then got to where I was decent at it. And a local fella was just starting a music store over in York. And he did the repair work and ran the business for maybe 6 months. And then he got too busy with the business that he didn't have time to do all the repair work. So he asked me if I'd want to work for him, do the repair work. He had taught me a lot previous to that when I was still in the tinkering phase. He had showed me how to do a lot of repair work. So he started me off. He was a good repairman. Bob Campbell was his name. His son still runs a business in York's Campbell's Music. But I started working for him doing repair work, and I was there from about a couple of years, and then I got the job with Jimmy.
Okay.
And moved to Nashville for 2 years. Then when I came back, I got the job again doing the repair work. Yeah. And I was there for 20-some years.
Now, do I understand correctly that you are also involved in like vintage firearm, either restorations or replicas, stuff of that nature?
Yeah, I had gotten interested in flintlock rifles, shooting them and building them. And I worked at a local gun shop building flintlock rifles there again for about 20 years or so, 22 years. And we would go to what they call rendezvous, where people dress up traditional period.
Like the reenactors.
And camp out in tents for a week, you know? And
similar to a bluegrass festival, as it turns out.
pretty much like a bluegrass festival, except you're in different garb.
Yeah, only slightly.
So yeah, I got real wrapped up in building flintlocks, and I don't hardly do any of it now anymore, but I built a lot of them over the years.
Well, given that you've also taken to building recreation necks for like conversion banjos, I'm wondering if a lot of those skills tend to overlap or have helped you, with each other.
Oh yeah, definitely, without a doubt. I was building banjo necks before I got into the flintlock. So those skills, just being meticulous about building a nice neck, definitely transfers into whatever you want to build.
Yeah.
It's just that the item is different. The gun has different features, but once you develop an eye for the feel of a neck or the looks of a neck, that transfers over into the looks and the feel of a rifle.
Going back to setup, are there any pieces of advice that you'd give from all of your experience? What are some of the important aspects to setup, maybe even ones that people don't normally think about?
Well, there's a few rules of thumb in setting up a banjo that will help in a setup. Mm-hmm. For example, the height of the tailpiece. The higher the tailpiece is off the head, the more mellow tone you tend to get.
Yeah.
The closer down to the head you crank the tailpiece, the brighter it tends to get in most situations. Every banjo is different. Of course, the obvious thing is the tightness of the head.
Yeah.
Tighter, the brighter, looser, the more mellow, softer, darker tone you get.
Yeah.
The height of the strings, a lot of guys want to play the strings as low as they can possibly get them, which is understandable. But if you tend to be a hard player, you can't play them real low with light gauge strings, You have to get the action up a little higher or use heavier strings. But those are kind of a couple rules of thumb there that you can start with. Make sure the neck's tight to the body, that the neck's not loose. You lose transference of vibration from the banjo pot to the neck, which makes a big difference.
Yeah.
The height of the fret, if the frets are too low, you can't get a good bite on the string with your finger. A lot of this stuff makes a minimal difference, but it makes a difference.
Yeah.
So if you get all
adds together.
If you get all these little things right, then you start being able to get the maximum out of your banjo.
Yeah.
The bridge is a big factor. I had a banjo one time. It was a TB2 tenor style 2 Gibson that I built a neck for and put a tone ring in it, and it just never sounded right. I had it for about a year, and every time I'd pick it up, I didn't like it at all. I'm thinking this thing should sound better than this. Because I used a Bill Sullivan tone ring, and they were always decent rings. I used a lot of them, but it just didn't sound right. So I thought one day, this when I had my music store, and I had it sitting on a rack on the floor in the store. So I thought, I'm going to see what I can do
to start monkeying with it.
To get this thing better. This should be a better banjo than it is.
Yeah.
So I had a drawer of old bridges, a whole bunch of old bridges that I took off instruments and just threw in the drawer.
Yeah.
So I started going through these bridges and started swapping bridges. And I finally hit a bridge that was just fit that banjo. That banjo just exploded in sound.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, holy cow. I mean, I knew a bridge would make a difference, but I didn't think it'd make this much difference.
Yeah.
And from then on, I realized how much that little piece of wood makes a difference in the sound and setup of a banjo.
Yeah.
That banjo just exploded. And that's a banjo I used on one of my projects. And I gave a CD to Jim Mills. And he heard that, and he said, "What banjo are you playing on there?" I said, "It's just a TB2 with a Sullivan tone ring." And he said, "Man," he said, "that thing really sounds great." He said, "Do you still have it?" I said, "No, I sold it years ago."
Do you recall what the bridge was that made the
No,
difference?
it was just something I had in the drawer, you know.
I assume that you think it's not the matter of this is a good bridge or a bad bridge. It's more about the pairing between what bridge a banjo might respond to.
Absolutely. Every banjo responds differently. You can put 5 different tone rings in the same banjo and try them, and they'll all sound different.
Mm-hmm.
You can put 5 different bridges on the same banjo, and they'll all sound different. It's finding that right combination that everything starts to vibrate as one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a band playing with that rhythm as one.
That's a great analogy, I think. Yeah.
There was a local banjo player, Bill Runkle. Maybe you heard of Bill.
I have
Runkle.
heard of Bill.
Played with Dale McCurry years ago. He passed away during COVID, but he was a great mechanic, car mechanic.
Okay.
And he told me one time, I've never forgotten this. He said, "You can have 100 motors, car engines coming off the assembly line at the same time, and one out of that 100 might just run heads and tails above the rest of them." He said, "That's because just by chance, all the parts that went into that motor were just balanced right. The tolerances were just right."
Yeah.
He said, every now and again you get a motor, it's not souped up, it's not been touched, it comes off the line, but it's just a killer of an engine.
Yeah.
And I always equated that with a banjo.
Yeah. I think that works really well.
If you get all those parts, even the neck wood, because the neck's as important to the banjo as sound-wise as everything else.
Right.
And if you get the right piece of wood paired with the pot and the right tone ring bridge, and they all start vibrating as one, then you got a killer banjo.
And back to our point though, it seems like there's very little way to predict that.
No.
How about when you're building a neck? Do you ever know with a neck that, oh, this is a great specimen of wood, or I've done a particularly good job on this one? And does that ever translate to it actually sounding better?
No, I don't think, like you said, you can't predict that.
Yeah.
You could have an aged piece of wood, make the nicest neck you've ever made in your life, and put it on a banjo, and it just might be mediocre. Mm-hmm. You might be able to take that neck off and put it on another pot, and it just might be a killer. You just can never figure it out.
Yeah, incredible.
And that's the difficult part in setting and picking a banjo.
Yeah.
You just never know if you have the right combination of parts.
Tough to know what the real potential of it is, whether you've reached it or not.
I had 3 banjos here a while back, two TB3s that were converted, and a 4. They were all pretty good. I played them all for a while, but they just weren't anything that just knocked your socks off. At least it didn't me, you know. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to swap tone rings around and just see what I get.
Yeah.
There was a chrome tone ring in one of the 3s, so I put that in the 4, which is a chrome banjo. Mm-hmm. So it fit that looks-wise. And I swapped the other ones around, and it made all 3 of them sound better.
Wow.
I couldn't hardly believe it myself. I thought, man, I lucked out here. I hit the right combination here, you know, and that's the way I left them. I thought I'm not going to monkey with them anymore, you know.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's the other half of it is banjos inherently have any number of adjustments you can make, but maybe that's the lesson is if you do find the right one, you probably best quit messing with it.
Sometimes you can over monkey. You can over monkey with a banjo and make it worse if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Was
there a particular banjo that you played throughout most of your career?
Not any one banjo. I had, when I was with Jimmy in the 60s, I bought an original pre-war RB4.
A flathead?
Flathead that I bought it from Jim Smoke. We were down at Royal Yarborough's one time, and I asked him, I said, Rule, do you have anything interesting down here? He said, well, I got this RB4, Jim Smoke's banjo. Jim played it for ages, and it was in rough shape, but it was $850.
Okay.
And that was in 68.
Okay.
Way back in 68.
Yeah.
Back in the old days. And I didn't have any money. I mean, working with Jimmy, you don't have any money, So I said, I really don't have $850. I said, you think he can work with me? He said, yeah. He said, Jim's a pretty good guy. I never met him. He said, let me call him. So I got him on the phone. And Jim was gracious enough to never met me, just on Rule's say so. He let me pay $50 a month until I paid it off.
Yeah.
When I came back home from being with Jimmy, I was flat busted. I had a 59 Ford with reverse gear out of the transmission.
Okay.
I had a wife and a daughter and no money.
Yeah.
And the only thing I had worth anything was the banjo. So I ended up selling it to a friend of mine.
Okay.
And I don't know where that banjo is now. He sold it some years later. But that's one I recorded one of the albums with Jimmy with.
Okay.
As far as having one for 20 years that I used religiously, no. I just, if I had a banjo and somebody wanted to buy it, I sold it and just got something else,
Interesting.
Up until recently, that I could afford to keep some of the stuff that I've had over the years. Back then, I was always in need of money for rent or a car or whatever,
Food, yeah.
So I'd buy and sell them,
That makes sense. What project of all the recordings you've made, whether it's Jimmy or solo, is there anything that you're the most proud of your playing on?
With Jimmy specifically?
No, just anyone who wants to. Oh, I've never heard of this Chris Warner guy. I gotta check him out. What would you point them towards first that you're most proud of?
Well, to be honest with you, I like the last project I did. With Jimmy, I wish I could get a chance to do some of it over because I've gotten better from the first time we recorded in the 60s.
Yeah.
I've gotten better after that. And being that I was so young when I went with him, young and naive. But I had plenty of time to get better. I wish I had a chance to do a lot of that over.
Yeah.
As far as being most proud, I would say my projects that I did on my own that are more recent.
Okay. Yeah, those are some great ones. And just for the record, sometimes it's tough to find this information. Which of Jimmy's albums are you on?
I'm on the Freeborn Man album.
Slowly I'm falling more in love with you. Slowly you're winning a heart that can be true. I can't hide my feelings no matter what I do. For slowly I'm falling more in love with you.
My name's actually, they put the band's name on the Tennessee album.
Okay.
But we're not on that album.
Huh. Interesting.
The Tennessee album came out while we were with Jimmy.
Okay.
Me and Herschel Sizemore and Bill Yates.
But it had been recorded.
But it had all been recorded prior to that.
Oh my God.
So we're listed as being on the Tennessee album, and we're not on it.
This is why it's confusing, and that's why I'm asking.
Yeah. So the Freeborn Man album, I think I'm on all but 3, which were pre-recorded tunes.
Okay.
And then Jimmy called me one time and went down and I did 4 songs on his first greatest hits album.
And he re-recorded those?
Yeah, he re-recorded some of them. He re-recorded Freeborn Man. J.D. Crow's on the second cut. And Kenny Ingram, me and Kenny and J.D. are on that album, each doing about 4 cuts.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess to wrap up, is there anything else you would want people to know about you or your playing or your career?
Well, I'm not doing any playing right now, so my career is pretty much over. I only play enough to test out instruments that I've worked on, repaired, and set up. Yeah. I don't go out and play anymore. So that phase of my life is done with. My wife and I have horses.
Oh, cool.
And between the horses and doing repair work part-time out of my house here, that pretty much keeps me busy.
Is the repair work something that you want, that you would encourage people to seek you out for, or are you trying to kind of keep that on the down low as well?
I don't want to get too much. I like banjo work primarily.
Well, I mean, feel free to let people know how to contact you if they're interested in that.
I don't advertise.
Okay.
You know, I don't have a store or shingle hanging out.
Right.
It's just word of mouth.
No website or nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, no website. If they need any work done on banjos specifically, they could contact me. Telephone would be the best at 717-259-9393. Close to York. I'm in East Berlin, close to York. Other than that, I don't advertise. Whatever comes along,
fair enough.
I'll do.
That's great. Well, hey, thank you so much again for your hospitality and for taking the time to talk banjos with me. It's been a really cool afternoon.
Sure, thanks. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. That's going to do it for this episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. The song clips you heard in this episode were Raking the Coals by Chris Warner, Milwaukee Here I Come by Jimmy Martin, several more by Chris Warner, including Lock, Stock, and Barrel, Sorrows All Around Me, High and Dry, and Lickety Split, and then finally the song Slowly by Jimmy Martin. Don't forget to do all your holiday shopping over at banjopodcast.com for those custom logo t-shirts, hats, stickers, and more. Special thanks to Sean McCormick, this episode's VIP supporter of the show. Head over to patreon.com/banjopodcast to support the show yourself or just to join in on our monthly video chat coming up on December 21st. Get your daily banjo licks by going to banjolicks.com and using coupon code PICKY50 to get 50% off your first month of daily banjo licks. Contact the show at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.